This is the Mahogany Books Podcast Network.
What's good, family? I'm Nikesha Elise Williams, the host of Black and Published Podcast, and the author of the novel, The 7 Daughters of Dupree. This historical fiction novel is about the secrets kept between mothers and daughters over the course of 7 generations, and is told backwards in time from 1995 to 1860. The 7 Daughters of Dupree was published January 27, 2026, and is available everywhere books are sold. So if you can, please consider getting a copy of The 7 Daughters of Dupree today.
The way we think about democracy is so fundamentally wrong, and we are so wounded by that idea of democracy that, we can't take that idea with us. It can't come.
What's good? I'm Nikesha Elise Williams, and this is Black and Published on the Mahogany Books Podcast Network, bringing you the journeys of writers, poets, playwrights, and storytellers of all kinds. Today's guest is Camonghne Felix, author of the essay collection, Let the Poets Govern. It's a treatise on the inherent harm of political power and an entreaty for people to seek collective and communal good from a praxis of poetics.
The Democratic Party had failed so significantly over the last century that it was inevitable. It had left open this pocket where people like Trump, where the right can come in and manipulate language to manipulate people.
In Let the Poets Govern, Camonghne is manipulating language to actually help people through the power of redaction. Why she says the erasure poems she included in the text are the best option to show people a new narrative of democracy. Plus, the reason she advocates for anarchy. And the music video that sparked Camonghne's love for words, writing, and all things story. That and more is next when Black and Published continues. All right, Camonghne, when did you know that you were a writer?
I was about 7 or 8, and I wrote a short story in my notebook based on a music video I'd seen. It was Common's song. You know that song, Before You Like My Love Away? And that video where
Testify, yes.
Testify, thank you. And I wrote a short story based on Testify, to the point where I gave it to my mom, and she was like, "This is a real story?" And I had to explain to her, no, it's a music video, but I wanted to actually write the story. So that was my first real memory of writing a solid thing. And since then, especially during my early childhood, I would do that often, just make up random stories, give them to my mom, and she would be like, "Did this happen? Yes or no?" I'd be like, "No, this is 100% fake." So yeah, that's how early I knew. And I was like, "Oh, this is fun. I haven't found anything more fun. So I'm going to do this fun thing."
The fact that there's music video fanfic and I didn't realize that was a possibility is everything.
I would never have called it that, but you're absolutely correct.
Music video fan fiction. I'm sorry, this is a whole tangent, but I love this origin story because music videos, especially back in the day, used to be so detailed. There was a whole storyline to the video that you had to follow along, that you could be invested in the characters for the 3.5 minutes of the song.
100%.
And why not make it a story?
100%. And it's actually funny that you say that, because after that, then I started writing actual fanfic. I started writing Harry Potter fanfic, a little bit of Lord of the Rings before it was a movie. So I was just on the internet walling with the pen, fanfic.net,
You was out here.
Yes.
So then, but I feel like most people know you as a poet. So then where did verse come in?
I want to say it's maybe the 2nd grade. I was in a school and a teacher had entered me into a poem recital competition. So you had to take a poem, or they assigned you a poem and you had to memorize it. And it was citywide. So I had to memorize a Langston Hughes poem, the iconic, right?
Yes, I do.
The iconic, right? And so I memorized it and I won. It was so random. It was like the first time in my childhood I had like won a thing. And I think like in the process of just like memorizing that poem, I think I wound up falling in love with verse, like the rhythm, like the kind of performance that's necessary when you like approach an actual poem. I remember being at that age and the competition happened in a classroom. And I remember just kind of like feeling different once I had won. Like, I don't know how to explain it, just like a little bit of a different person. And then I really started writing poetry earnestly after that. I think like my first real poem, I was 13, and it's called Purgatory because I was tortured as a child. And my mom helped me get it published in like a pay to play little journal situation. And yeah, 13, that's when I really leaned in.
And so you go back and forth between poetry and prose. Do both feel like home?
No, only poetry feels like home. Prose feels like a conversation that I'm having with myself that I'm like not super excited about. Does that make sense? it's like, it's like prose is like for me like the space to really build on an argument, right? And sometimes I don't want to argue. Sometimes I just want to like say a thing and like let that be a thing. And I think in prose, obviously we learn this early when you take English classes in middle school, right? There's a thesis. The thesis is ultimately the argument. And in prose, you can't really get away from that, right? Obviously, there are some like exceptions, but even in creative nonfiction, which is my bag, I love a creative nonfiction essay. Even in those, ultimately, an argument is still being made and is still being made legible. Whereas in a poem, like there might be an argument, but like the focus in the poem is not always on the argument. It's on language, it's on rhythm, it's on sound, right? And having all those tools available to me that allow me to just say a thing, whether or not it's an argument, has always felt really safe for me.
There is a definite argument in Let the Poets Govern. I endeavor to say that the title is the argument, but this is not your first book. You've had Build Yourself a Boat, which was a poetry collection, and then Dyscalculia, which was a memoir. And knowing that you straddle these lines between poetry and prose, telling your personal story, as well as focusing on subjects and objects that may or may not have to do with you. And then you combine those things in Let the Poets Govern. What was urgent about this particular book that forced you to combine those forms to get your point across to make the best argument that you could?
I think that the argument for like a better or a new world can be articulated through any genre, right? But poetry has been my entry point into like reclaiming my own politic, right? And so I couldn't write a book that was about that reclaimed politics without also making it clear that poetry was the vehicle that brought me to it. There's a different argument that I could have made that would not have privileged or prioritized the thinking or logics of poetry, right? I could have written a book that is just about political language, right? And about speeches and like how we're all moved and motivated by language. But like when I really sat down and thought about it, what I'm talking about when I'm talking about language is poetry, is poetics, right? Which is like the study of poetry and how it shows up across genres in the world in general. So it just had to be that, right? It just like, because I felt that there was a story I needed to tell, because I felt like there was something I really needed to say about language and about our current political moment, which is a moment that I saw coming 5 years ago. There was no way to be able to make that case and that claim without grounding it in poetry, which is the thing I know better than anything else.
What did you see coming 5 years ago through your work with language in the political theater?
Before I wrote this book, we had already had Trump for one term, right? And during the 2020 election, I was working for Elizabeth Warren. She was running for president. I was on that presidential campaign. I think being that close to like just any kind of political campaign, especially a presidential campaign, teaches you a lot about the way that language works. Because for the most part, like everything about a political campaign is language, is messaging, right? On any campaign, in any business, right? The most important output is your messaging. So the communications people are the most important people on the team, the social media people, all the communications people. And so watching the campaign and watching the way that the right was pushing back on us, I could see that there was this attention to using language, to using populist language, right? to try and drive more right-leaning policies and ideas. And the only way that that's possible is by trying to be in touch with the kind of language that everyday people are using, right? And so I'm watching the right kind of like weaponize language, the language that the Democrats on the left are used to using, right? Which is, we're going to make America better, right? We're going to turn America into a place that is like equal for all, right? And when the left says it, or I don't even want to say the left, right? Because the left is a whole other thing. But when the Democratic Party says it, right? The Democratic Party is still actually saying, we're going to prioritize the wealthy, we're going to prioritize Wall Street, but we want you to think that we are doing that on your behalf, right? And so I'm watching the Republican Party borrow from the Democratic Party in terms of being able to drive messaging, again, that is more populist. And I'm looking at the way that that language is forming up, and I'm looking at the way that our language is being structured. I'm writing speeches for Elizabeth Warren, and I'm paying good attention to the kind of speeches that like the Republicans are putting on the stage, right? And they are like just as charged, they are just as compelling, right? And for the most part, they ultimately wind up saying the same things, except that like on the right, you have like, let's get immigrants out of our country. And on the left, you have, we need to deal with the immigration crisis, right? Ultimately, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I saw a moment where the right would weaponize language as a way to drive us towards a very, very far right direction, right? To drive us towards very, very far right policies, and to try to use populism to get everybody on board to actually like sign up for policies that are going to hurt them, as long as they sound good, as long as they're moving, as long as it's motivating. I knew that like the Democratic Party had failed so significantly over the last century that it was inevitable. It had left open this pocket where people like Trump, where the right can come in and manipulate language to manipulate people, because the Democratic Party has been doing that for so long that it just becomes part of the game. So I knew that when I saw that we put up Biden, I was like, that's not going to work. We're going to lose. That's number one. Two, I knew that like once we lost with Biden, that there would be no one with like the institutional quote knowledge or history who would actually be able to like direct the party into a direction that was like both innovative and new, but also like could actually deal with the threat of Trump. There was nobody. So yeah, I saw a world where like Joe Biden would win inevitably, and that over the next 3 years he would decline, and that if they could no longer figure out how to actually challenge and break through on messaging, that the right would beat us. It just would.
Which is what
Sorry, that was
happened.
a long answer. Which is what happened.
No, it's fine. I love the answer, and I love the book because I said it before, but like I work at a social justice nonprofit, and all we do is talk about narrative all day long and language, and really forcing organizations and organizers and movement workers and change makers to get really clear about the language that they're using, being able to define it for themselves, so that when the right inevitably co-opts that very language that you're using to define whatever progressive goal that you have, you can push back on it and understand that there is a difference between what you're saying on the progressive side and what the right is saying that's being turned into a populist message to advance authoritarianism.
You're absolutely right. Like this authoritarian administration has been waiting in the wings for this moment. Like they knew it was coming, which is part of the reason why it's like so mind-blowing that like the Democrats didn't know, or they did, but they didn't really care. They didn't think that it was a real threat because they don't think that America needs populism. Anyway, we could talk about this for days, but
we could. But I mean, that question, because it is at the center of the book of Let the Poets Govern, and we were talking a bit before we officially started recording about like, you know, how the landscape of the United States has changed politically, yes, but also media wise. Publishing is a media industry, and you are publishing this very political book in an election year. Midterms are coming up in November, and at a time where there don't seem to be any checks on the kinds of stories and messages that are censored, as in everybody can get this smoke. How has it been for you just writing this book and recognizing that the world that this book is entering is different from the one that it needs.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you asked that because the book that I sold is almost entirely different from the book that it became, almost entirely. And it's because of exactly what you're saying, because I had, this foresight, which I don't want to like suggest that I'm unique or that that foresight is unique. Many people have had it. But because I had that foresight, I was like, okay, when I think ahead in 5 years or even 4 years, what is the thing I could put out into the world that is like most helpful, most useful to this imminent conversation or what was imminent? So the original book I'd sold was me basically trying to argue that if politicians read poetry and invested in poetry, they would like write better speeches and like be able to actually write more honest, more human-centered policies. After like a couple of weeks of just like sitting in my Boston apartment by myself, drinking alcohol by myself, sad, licking my wounds, I really had to ask myself, is the story that I'm telling a story that is most beneficial to advancing the progressive causes, is most beneficial to advancing the arguments of the left? And I thought about it and I was like, this argument actually does the exact opposite, right? I'm literally saying to politicians, here's how you can weaponize poetics and weaponize poetry to convince people through your speeches that you are actually more advanced politically and legislatively than you are, right? And through that realization, I had to really think like, okay, then if that's the most negative and effective use of poetics in politics, then like what's the opposite, right? Or rather, like what is the thing that is also effective but does not put power into the hands of politicians but back into the hands of people? And so I sat with myself for a really long time, almost a year and a half, just trying to like really bang out like what is the thing I really, really want to say? What is the thing that my spirit wants to say? And the thing that my spirit wanted to say was scary. And I knew that I was taking a risk. I was like, oh, this is a big swing because I don't know that people want to hear that the world is in such dire straits that we have to totally rethink it. I don't think people want to hear that because the scale of action is too big. So I sort of like went back to the proposal, rewrote the idea, took that back to my editor, who was like, this is great. We're happy to move forward with this. Thank God. Fingers crossed. Thank you. And yeah, I just went to work for 2.5 years doing like deep, deep research, really like nailing down what the narratives were in the book, the different threads. And then, once it was done, I just like cried a lot because it was a really hard book for me to write. But I got to the end, sent it to my editor. She was like, this is done. And I cried. But then I went back to it and I was like, this is not done. I need to try again. So I basically wrote this book like 3 times.
How did it change over each of those iterations?
The first iteration was the book that I talked about, right? That was like more about how politicians can use poetry. The second one was a lot more steeped in like memoir and like the tactics and logics of memoir, right? I was trying to tell the story about me being in politics and like what I'd learned about language from being in politics. But still, that book was like more fixated on the telling of my story versus like the telling of the story of our political landscape and how individuals can actually relate to that or see themselves in that. And then this last version is, the version that readers are going to read, which is very much a hybrid of all three of those different ideas or approaches, right? So it's steeped in memoir, but it's steeped in poetics, but it's steeped in analysis. And even though, like, there are so many things that would change about this book, of course, right? It's been 2 years since I turned it in, a year since I turned it in. I think that in the process of rewriting and rewriting, I like got to the meat of it. I did what needed to be done for this book. I'm okay with it.
There's no easy way to discuss the difficulties of publishing at this particular level, and also the necessity of being able to publish this kind of book at this particular level, given the climate, knowing that publishing is a business. And while it has not been subject to the worst of this administration, that neutral position may not last, right? And so, you turning it in, I believe like you have a dateline in there about like, you're writing October 2024. It's right before you have to turn it in. Like you turning it in when it was still a Biden administration And even though it wasn't what was contracted, your editors are like, we're still going to go with this book. And then to be 18 months later, and they're still supporting it because, you know, they bought it. But it's just a different place to be. And so it's, I know the feeling is overwhelming. And yet you have to like rise above it and like stand 10 toes down on your work.
Stand on business. You know what Maya said? She said, I got 10 toes and I'm standing on them, standing on all of them. I feel that, and you're absolutely right. You know, like if we're going to be transparent, this is probably the most anticlimactic book rollout I've ever had. And I didn't want to think that like people would be, if not disinterested, then like just like scared or anxious about dealing with politics in this like very direct way. I think that people are happy to engage peripherally. Like people are happy to like throw out a tweet. You know what I mean? Like, we have to fight this administration. Everybody's happy to say that on social media. But when it comes to actually like supporting and defending a project that is like very blatantly making an argument for anarchy, ultimately, right? People don't want to support that because I think the politics, leftist politics, feels scary because so much of it is ideological. And people are like really hungry for somebody to just like fix it, right? Like, we are scared nobody is coming to save us. And I think people want answers. And I think that I am forcing people to ask, or trying to ask people to ask the right questions in order to get the answers that we all really want, right? What I'm trying to suggest is that there are these really smart, really useful questions that we can ask about governing that can help us get to those answers. And I just think that people don't necessarily want to talk about this right now.
Before I ask more questions about the arguments of the book, can you go ahead and read something from it?
Sure.
Let the Poets Govern by Camonghne Felix is one part memoir, one part literary criticism, and one part social commentary on the current state of politics in the United States. In weaving her personal history, from growing up in the Bronx to working with New York's former governor and a one-time presidential candidate, alongside her poetic practice, Camonghne argues that the right and left are weaponizing the same language to harm all Americans, and that the time is now for something new. Here's Camonghne.
I will read from the last chapter, chapter 9, the fourth sermon on the warplane or the coda, after Gwendolyn Brooks, after Lillian Yvonne Bertram. It is fall, and with my wife, I weave my body between the trees of the orchard. I plan to make apple pie, applesauce, apple cider. How to make comes to me intuitively. How to make lives in the lines of my palm. In the orchard, just days after the US formally descended into regression, I sit among the sweetness of the apple's nectar and realize that the end of the world is coming. There is little left to look forward to, little to rejoice in. But when I sit in this orchard with the people I love, with the community I've submitted my labor to, I feel hope waiting for me. We are all in the orchard, making use of the apple in as many ways as we can. And of course, fear and despair sit with us too. We all fear the ache of knowledge, that sensory data that articulates our nature. We crave innocence, the shield that deadens our senses and lessens the labor and lightens the heavy load of knowledge. This antagonism is replicated in generation after generation, a nutrient in the soil. But we learn to survive this enmity, dressing it up with rituals, using it to realize our spirituality, to realize continuity. We are both resentful of the apple and ravenous for its seductive flavor, its satiating gifts. Humans make record of the harvest. We make art with the flesh of the fruit, make marks with the black of the seed. We infect the world with this nameless hunger so that we will always yearn for what has been lost in the burning of the trees, so that they will always feel the pull of the fruit, so that they may remember their subdued impulses, that generative urge to sow. This is record keeping. This record keeping is poetry. That urge to sow is what gives birth to poetry, the yearning for language to animate that record, that flesh, that seed. This is bravery, that step one takes in between thinking and marking. The poem is a thought made up of images and language. The mark making is the visualization of speech, of language. The poem preceded itself. The poem had already found its speaker.
Thank you. Reading this book, and once I got to the end, I felt like it was almost an offering of penance for a past version of yourself. Would you say that's a correct reading?
Yeah, I think so.
How have you changed, not just in the way that you think about politics and the use of language and poetics, but like how have you changed inside in leaving the political theater from the governor's office in New York to the presidential campaign trail in Boston and like just really coming back to language as your grounding?
I think I have come to really confront the lie of scarcity. Like, I think a big part of being in politics, especially for Black women, is this fear that like power itself is limited and that only some people can have it. And that fear of scarcity leads us to believe that like it has to be us, you know? That like if you are a person who believes that, then it has to be you. You have to be the person to go and get power. You have to be the person to come and bring that back. And scarcity is such an anti-community, anti-communal idea, right? To believe in scarcity means that only some people have power, only some people have the ability to challenge power, and only some people will have the privilege to be able to walk into the arena to do that challenging. And I think, especially for Black girls, exceptionalism is a trap. It feels good to have power. Power is fun. It feels good to be able to walk into a room and know that like you can call the governor or you can call the congressman. But then like when you look at the results of scarcity and like what it leaves behind, you wind up with all these people who are like sort of well-meaning but ultimately corrupt, right? Because they really bought into that idea of scarcity. I always say that like a person who wants to be president has got to be like a little not well, has got to be a little bit of a narcissist. Because you kind of have to be to believe that like you, this one person, can be the one to change
The world.
centuries,
Yeah.
the world, right? You got to be a little psycho. And as a psycho person, I feel like I'm allowed to use that language. Um, I think I realized that power is communal, power is community, and that power itself, like the idea of power, is in some ways kind of useless. Power ultimately is about exactly what it sounds like. Power is about power, right? And power by itself is violent. It is inherently focused on defeat, on conquer, right? Once I moved out of scarcity, once I moved out of exceptionalism and really just confronted the fact that like I'm just a girl, I'm just a Black girl trying to make sure that her family eats, trying to make sure that like when I look up in 20 years, I feel like I was useful to the project of making the world better. And yeah, I'm a different person. This book also made me a different person. I feel like I've evolved many times while writing this book. I had to confront some real stuff. And I also think that it has helped me get comfortable with the idea that like evolution, especially like intellectual and political evolution, is actually like a gift, right? That like everyone deserves. And I think the worst thing I could do is try to pretend that what I know now, that I'd always known it, or that it wasn't part of an evolution, right? Which I think like gives other people permission to evolve.
You say on page 153, what is the point of power, of wanting it, of acquiring it, if we don't use it to attack the most pressing issues of our lifetime?
Mm-hmm.
But you say before that on page 135, the questions now are, what is power and how am I supposed to use it? You said before that this book is kind of advocating for anarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a place where power can be used to actualize the anarchy, but while holding on to the pragmatic?
Because of the society that we live in, because of the way that it's been structured, power is necessary and inevitable, right? Like people will have power, people will lose power because we live in a capitalist, racist, colonial, militarized state. I think that in knowing that, questioning power is like the most useful thing we can do, like questioning like why we need power, right? Like why we need to defeat in order to protect and save, which is funny because that sounds like a military slogan. To me, that is practical. Like asking that question, right? and working within your community to try and answer it, like that's practical to me. What's also practical though is like building a community that collectively is not only trying to answer that question, but is like localized in the necessity of answering that question, right? So like when I'm organizing with Palestinian and Arab folks, we understand that because power has been compromised and taken away, right, that it also then needs to be reclaimed. As problematic as it is, as harmful as it is to continue to invest in power, right? When people are being disenfranchised and genocided, right? Somebody needs to be able to carry a weapon. Somebody of the genocided needs to be able to have some kind of power. So, in the most practical sense, right? And when I'm working with that community, my focus is on giving power back to the people on the ground, right? So, empowering their narratives, allowing them to tell us what's actually happening, allowing them to tell us how many people are actually dead, right? Versus, you know, the register, right? Because we know that what's being captured on the register is not in line with like how Palestinian people are counting their deaths. So when I think about practicality, that's what I think about, right? Like, how do we work together to build these immediate modes of resistance that offer us practical solutions while at the same time questioning power, who deserves it, who has access to it, and whose narratives of power are actually harmful? Does that answer your question? Does that make sense?
What I'm trying to get at, and it's not a new thought for this podcast, I've had several guests say it, is the actuality that America as an empire is at its end is common. It's not a new thought. And for some people, I would say like yourself, perhaps even like me, and for others, there is a deep desire to witness the end of the empire, to build something new. And there is that tension between those who are like, burn it all down, and those who are like, wait, can we just build better from what we already have? Right? And so I think that's what I'm trying to get to. There's a tension between anarchy and pragmatism. Can it be overcome? I think is the question.
Got you. I think I understand what you're saying now. Antagonism between anarchy and pragmatism. Yeah, no, I don't think we can do both. I don't.
And that's fine. It's a very yes or no. No, it's a no.
Yeah, no, but let me tell you why, right? I think like the question of pragmatism is a question that asks, can we build from what we already have, right? That's what pragmatism is asking us, which you worded so perfectly. Anarchy says like, no, like we can't, right? Like any element of what's been left behind is already corrupted by the existence of what came before, right? So that's another part of what the book is saying, is that like even the way we think about democracy is so fundamentally wrong, and we are so wounded by that idea of democracy that like we can't take that idea with us. It can't come. It's broken, right? We can't fix that.
So then what can a poem do to help us vision the new society without the structure and framework of our current democracy?
What poetry allows us to do, it doesn't necessarily like give us answers, but it does give us tools, right? So even like in the most theoretical sense, I think I talk about this in the book, but there's something called a caesura in a poem, which is literally like an opportunity to pause in kind of like an unexpected way or in an unexpected space, right? That by itself, I bring that logic into organizing. The first thing I think about is my dad saying to me like 20 years ago, like, just wait, just take a second and wait, right? So there are people everywhere who are like, I want to take action. I want this to happen. And it's like, no, you should take action and you should want this to happen, but take a second. Really think about what you're asking for. Really think about who the people are who you want power to be taken away from, right? Think about it. So that's one lesson, right? The most practical. And then the other lesson that poetry teaches us, I think especially people like Audre Lorde, who by herself is extremely problematic, and June Jordan, who fought Audre Lorde for being problematic, is you can also see that, right? You can see this like working antagonism, to use the word that you used otherwise, where we're actually moving and shifting people away from their positions. So Audre Lorde is an incredible poet, incredible essayist, incredible thinker, but she was a Zionist. And June Jordan came through and said, actually, that's not going to work for us. It's not going to work for us as people in community with each other, as sisters. We can't do that. And that by itself, by the end of Audre's life, she was saying totally different things, right? Which drove her audience to a whole different space of thought that they didn't otherwise know that they needed to be in. And because of those moments of antagonism and tension, people are creating new kinds of work. People are making new kinds of statements, right? Which is giving birth to new and different kinds of leaders. And so that's kind of the argument, is that like, if we think about ourselves as poets, then like we have to take the teachings from poetry in order to be leaders. And I could go down like a list of the ways to use poetry to learn, but in some ways I feel like that would kind of be like antithetical to the book. Like, I'm asking people to find in poetry, like, what is the thing that moves you to think differently about the people you're in community with? Like, what is that thing? And then once you can identify one, and to take a step back, like, one practical thing that poetry does is it tells you who you're in community with, right? So even that, like asking people to sit down and really ask themselves, like, who am I accountable to? Who relies on me, right? I think that poetry is most helpful in allowing us to ask the right question that then take us towards pragmatic action.
Why the erasure poem?
Ooh, okay. So the erasure poem is really, really important because I think an erasure poem can do a couple of things, but the two that I'm most interested in is an erasure poem that highlights language and an erasure poem that subverts language. I'd like to think that these erasures do both. So the point is to try and illustrate how the powerful of the past have used language to manipulate, and then to try and take that same erasure and those same modes of erasure and try to superimpose a narrative that is liberating. And so the erasure allows for that, like, it's kind of like a double entendre, right? Puts us in this mode where we're being required to actually like pay attention to like syntax, right? Small things that tell us what we need to know about how power is working and who it's working for. And I think asking the erasure to do both of those things, to highlight, to center, to decenter, to subvert, I felt like the erasure was one of the like best tools I had to actually be able to do that. I could have taken those documents, right? And I could have crossed the lines out. Very different, because when you're crossing the line out, that's not a redaction, right? You're not taking language away. You're trying to contextualize language that isn't stretched out. But if what I'm saying is that this language can be totally disappeared by enacting a new narrative, by considering a new narrative, then erasure is the only option.
In addition to like the high-minded, so to speak, concepts that we've been talking about power and who has it and all of that in terms of politics and the poetic, you also do reveal a bit more of yourself in this book about, you know, seeing the ugly side of a day, not going to high school for like a whole year.
Yeah, no, legit.
And as you mentioned earlier, like you don't have an undergrad degree, but you have 2 masters, and inviting people into your thought processes and your evolution as a thinker, as an organizer, and also as someone who can move between spaces very seamlessly. What do you want readers to take away from your book?
I want readers to know that qualitative and quantitative information work together, but not separately, right? So what we want to know about the world is taught to us both by our experiences and the data that helps illustrate those experiences. I think over the last decade, we've like fallen into this thing that feels in some ways like kind of anti-intellectual, this sort of like personal experience is like the data that you need to understand the world. And it's just not enough, right? Personal data is like an invitation to trying to understand the larger context that your situational traumas, et cetera, are contextualized in. And I think what I want people to know is that your body, your history has information, and that information can be backed up, validated, and thus destroyed by this kind of critical analysis that only comes from trying to locate and understand history. So I guess in one simple phrase, it's like history creates the future. And like your job is to try and understand history in order to build a new future for yourself and for your people.
Amen.
That's really it. Yeah.
Amen. I'm going to let that stand. Before I let you go for the afternoon, I want to move into a speed round and a little game. What is your favorite book?
Nikesha, what would you know how this goes. All of a sudden you're gonna have
all y'all writers are like, and I'm excluding myself from this question, but like all of y'all are like, oh my God, it's so hard. What is your favorite book today, right now, in this moment?
Right now, in this moment. Okay. My favorite book right now in this moment is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. She is a Japanese writer, actually best known for this book. And it's a book about like a woman's benign life, like just a woman who works in a convenience store. And it's deeply humanizing, tells us so much about the way society, the kind of hierarchies that we impose onto the human experience and onto oppressed people in particular. And it's also just really funny and acerbic and weird. And that's the kind of shit I'm into.
Who is your favorite author?
I don't want to say this because it's so typical, but I guess this is why it's typical. Sula is my favorite book of all time. It is what it is.
Okay. So we're going to go with Toni Morrison.
It just annoys me. Whatever. We don't have to talk.
It's okay. Toni Morrison gets shouted out all the time on Black and Published. It's a standard. Who was your favorite poet?
Oh, man. Oh, that list can go on for days. Really love Robert Hayden. Mahogany L. Brown, who's been my mentor since I was 15 of all time. One of my favorites of all time. Taylor Davis, who is a trans poet who lives in the DMV. Sylvia Plath is one of my favorites. Also an embarrassing one to note. I'm going to keep going because I have a lot. Louise Glick, top 5, gotta be. June Jordan. Yeah, maybe I'll just stop there.
That's 6. I like that list. Name a poet you think people don't know enough about.
I don't think people know enough about Shakespeare as a poet. I think everybody knows Shakespeare as a playwright.
Mm-hmm.
I think people understand that he wrote poetry, especially sonnet, but that man was eaten down. And I just feel like people don't actually invest in understanding his work, like everyday people, like scholars do. And I think that like those of us who are not scholars should actually invest in understanding more about how Shakespeare was out here working in these streets.
If money were no object, where would you go? What would you do? And where would you live?
If money was no object, I would live in Mexico City. If money was no object, I would go to the BVI, which is where my mom's family is from. And if money was no object, what would I do? Right now, I think I would disappear from the face of the earth. I think I would delete all my social media, any sort of public profile, and just disappear somewhere in Mexico City.
That actually sounds kind of fun.
Right?
Sounds kind of fun. Name 3 things on your bucket list.
Oh, to live in another country, to write a novel, which I'm working on, and I'm very excited. It's the most fun thing I've ever done in my life. And to remarry my spouse. I low-key want to just have another wedding.
What brings you joy?
Fresh orange juice under a really hot sun, reading and feeling immersed. Because that don't always happen. I feel like more times than not, you like step into a book and you're like, I want to be with you, but I can't get there.
I literally wait for the moment for the book to take me.
Exactly. And I feel like the best feeling in the world is when the book gets you and takes you and you can't get out. Best feeling.
Yes. What brings you peace?
Writing, just sitting at my desk, getting into a story, being lost.
I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
So our game is called Rewriting the Classics. Classic is however you define it. Name one book you wished you would have written.
Bro.
Is it Sula?
Yeah, bro.
It's cool. Most people, when they go Morrison for that question, go Beloved. But
okay,
Sula is up there. When I interviewed Tayari, I think she said Song of Solomon. So you're in good company. Name one book where you want to change the ending, and how would you do it?
Oh my God. Don't worry, it's not going to be Sula. I've talked about this book so many times. If she ever heard me talk about this, she would probably think I hate her guts. I do not. I think she's an incredible writer. Otessa Moshfegh, My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Oh, nah. If I could rewrite the ending of that book, I would do it in a heartbeat. You ain't even got to pay me. It doesn't need a satisfying ending. It doesn't need a perfect ending. It just needs an ending that isn't 2 seconds and doesn't end on this tragic social moment without really including it in the universe. So I guess I would just keep the story going. I don't want to give spoilers away, but something happens on the same day as the Twin Towers falling. And it's the last page and that's it. And then it just stops. And not in a way that's interesting or cool. To me, it just stops. She's like, I'm watching TV and I see the towers fall. And it's the same day that someone important to her dies.
You need at least 15 more pages.
Come on.
At least take me to the repass or
come on.
Or searching the grounds for take me somewhere.
Give me another 5 pages of useful introspection that just at least tells me how this character feels about the fact that this has happened on the same day. Make some connection. Yeah. Stop trying to make all the connections implicit. Stop it. Only essayists get to do that. Make a fucking point. Sorry, I'm done.
It's fine. Oh, you have to answer this last question. You have to answer this last question. Name a book that you think is overrated or overtaught, but I want the overrated one, and why.
I know one. Touré, he not dead.
He not dead, but he's problematic.
And also, what's the one? Malcolm Gladwell? The two of them can go for me. Or just try again. Just like start over. Try again. Come up with some new ideas or books. It's just so uncritical. And like, so it's just, how do y'all get away with this stuff? I don't understand, but it's fine.
All right, I'll let that stand. Final question. When you are dead and gone and among the ancestors, what would you like someone to write about the legacy of words and work that you left behind?
I want people to capture the inherent like softness of my work, even though that's something that like not a lot of people would ascribe to it right now. But I do think that my work has a softness and a gentleness that I think goes understated, especially for Black women and Black women writers. Is that a good enough answer? Like, there's so many other things I can say, but I just want people to like recognize the softness of Black women writers who are writing into their time, which means that they have to take on some aggression, some intensity, right? But to write about me softly. I really hope they don't write about me the way they write about Audre Lorde. I pray that. But yeah.
To write about you softly. I think that's a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Big thank you to Camonghne Felix for being here today on Black and Published. You can follow Camonghne on the socials at Camonghne on Instagram and Threads. And Camonghne is spelled Camonghne. And make sure you check out Let the Poets Govern. It's out now from One World. You can get a copy of the book from Mahogany Books and get 10% off your first purchase using code BLACKPUB at checkout. That's BLKPUB. That's our show for the week. If you like this episode and want more Black and Published, head to our Instagram page. It's at Black and Published, and that's BLK and Published. There, I've posted a bonus clip from my interview with Camonghne about the skills she had to develop to be able to craft this book. Make sure you check it out and let me know what you think in the comments. I'll holler at y'all next week. Peace.
What's going on, family? This is Derek Young
And Ramonda Young,
owners of both Mahogany Books and the Mahogany Books Podcast Network.
We really want to thank each and every one of you for listening to this episode. And if you enjoyed what you just heard, drop us a review and rate us on whatever platform you download podcasts on.
We truly appreciate each and every one of you for supporting us and making us your go-to for Black books. And we look forward to connecting with you all sometime in the future.
Thank you again, fam. And always remember, Black books matter.